when you're in the Holy Land, and you'll realize that when you go, the land itself talks so much about Scripture. And when I think of Revelation, when I think of the goodness of how the Father got our heart and the heart of humanity, how he unfolded the mystery of the Incarnation, I see the land. I see going from Old Testament to New Testament, from desert to the green of Galilee, from the manna to the Eucharist. That's what I see, and I see it in the land, from dryness to the source of sources, which is Galilee Lake, receiving all the waters coming down from Hermon, melting. So it's a little bit the journey we're going to do now. For me to bring you to the Eucharist, I'm going to start in the desert. So half of the country of Israel is desert. If you count Jericho and under, it's just desert. And around Jericho, it's the Judean desert. And Samaria is not out of the sources where there are wells, it's dry. And then you go up the Jordan Valley and you follow the Jordan. Around the Jordan, just on the banks, it's green, but otherwise it's dry. And you go gradually to Galilee, which is all green. So it's the scripture starts with the revelation. Okay, Abraham is coming from Mesopotamia and he comes down into Canaan, but really quickly he goes and settles where? In Beersheba, which literally means the place of the 7 wells, or the place of the covenant. Sheva can at the same time be 7 and covenant in Hebrew. And the Beer is the well in Hebrew. And that's where he settles in, and that's desert, that's dry. And all the patriarchs, his son, Isaac, won't go out of the Holy Land. He will send a servant to go and get him a wife. It's only Jacob that's going to go out to get a wife and comes back and settles in Samaria. So if we go back to the people of Israel that were in Egypt and came out of Egypt, out of slavery, the Jewish tradition says that if they stayed 40 years lost, turning around, it's because when they came out of Egypt, they were slave physically, they got to freedom physically, but psychologically, they needed 40 years to stop being a slave here. And for me, this is so much an analogy of us at our conversion, all of us, when we really met God. There's a moment of fervor, a moment where we meet him, and after that we have to evangelize our life and evangelize our deepest self. And we have so many tracks and reactions. We're on cruise control, and we don't obey to God. We just do what we can with the new form of life, of possibilities that are given to us. And it's not in one go that we obey to God's wisdom. It's a journey. We learn, and we're gradual in it. And the people of Israel needed, according to the Jewish tradition, 40 years to be able to enter the promised land. It took them 40 years to finally control their freedom before they would really be tested by people that don't have their behavior. And so God was an educator, and he took all that time. And in the midst of that time, he gave himself. He was present. In which way? You know your scriptures? How was God present with the people of Israel in the desert for 40 years? He was physically present. In what form? In a cloud. In a cloud. And scripture tells us that in that cloud, there was fire at night, so they could follow him. And during the day, it was obvious the cloud was moving. And they would never know when the cloud was stationed, they had to camp, but they would never know for how much time, which is totally uncomfortable. Because when you have, like they did, I mean, we imagine, okay, a little group following a cloud. I saw printings with computer, and now you can really do, according to the scripture, the amount of tents by tribe, so times 12 tribe. It's pretty much Steubenville full of tents. And everybody with their herd. So you imagine the enormous camp that when they were rising and moving, it was like miles of people, merchandise, and herds moving. So when that stops, at the beginning, I imagine they negotiated with God, like the cloud stopped, but he's going to go in 3 days, so let's not really pitch tent. And then he was staying 2 years, so they had to pitch tent anyway, right? And so in the end, I'm pretty sure that they pitched every time, not knowing, because you have the wind, you have the sand, you have dangers. If you don't really pitch tent, you lose merchandise, you lose. You put yourself in danger, and your herd, so your livestock, your food. And God put them voluntarily in that uncomfortable situation where they would never know what's ahead. Plus, he gave his presence, so they had the security of knowing that he knows. They didn't know what he thinks, but they could obey to something firm, which gives security. And there's another thing that he gave after a while. It's, what was the food they got? The manna. The manna. So they, and if you go and search in the scriptures, there's other places that define that the manna would taste the food that they desired. You have that in the book of Ecclesiastes. And so they were like, oh Lord, I want a pizza today. The manna would taste the pizza. And so their clothes, says scripture, was not getting old. They stayed with the same clothes. And it was not getting old. And so all the essentials for a human being were fulfilled. And still they grumbled. But God was there among them. And that presence, after the tabernacle, the description of the tabernacle was given to Moses, they built one. That presence would penetrate and stay in the Holy of Holies. Now, I want to comment that presence of God. The Feast of Tabernacle that we just finished today, tonight we're entering, today we were Shmini Atzeret. They started to, all the Jews of the world, they started to pray for rain, and finished the Tabernacle Feast. So what I've described, that's what they're trying to relive by building a booth and spending 8 days in that booth, inviting guests, spiritual guests, like all the patriarchs and their wives, but also concrete guests, the neighbors, even if they're not Jewish. And what is the definition, and that's from the book of Isaiah, it's not from the gospel, of Emmanuel? God with us. Now it's literal. When you do Hebrew, Imanu is the pronoun with us, and El is God. So it's literal, God with us. That principle or that possibility, that concept is totally accepted by the Jews. It's from Isaiah. That's the old covenant. It's not the new one. So Emmanuel, we kind of think we sing that in Christmas, and we Advent, and we think, this is Christian concept. No, to God being with the people of Israel is totally a concept of the scripture, and it evolved through revelation. And it's so beautiful to see how God used exactly what he had given, but just brought it forward as they were going north, after they came out of those 40 years, he unfolded more and more. As much as the world was coming to them, the world that didn't know God as one God. So they were facing idol worshippers, but they were more, or they had more material to be rooted in what they knew to be true. And it strikes me how gradually they went north. And Jesus was born in Bethlehem, right? Now, you know the definition of Bethlehem? Beit means house. Lechem, bread. Jesus finally got to be born in a house that's called the house of bread. Him who would become our bread, the Eucharist, the one who feeds the people, and not just the people of Israel through the manna, but the people, his own people, which is way larger by then than the people of Israel. But Sukkot is a holiday that was not kept by Catholics. Why? Because we have a permanent, we live in the Sukkot time. Our life is in that time, so we don't need that holiday. We have adoration, we have the Eucharist, which is God among us, and God that feeds us of himself. So we don't need to commemorate, or we do commemorate, it's called the Eucharist. It's called the Mass. And we live out of it. But for a Jew, just know that Revelation, that presence, to come back to the beginning of my teaching, that presence in the tabernacle, in the Holy of Holies, left the Holy of Holies when? When they went in exile, when the temple was destroyed, according to the scripture. And Scripture says, if you read the book of Malachi, that presence will come back from the Mount of Olives into Jerusalem. The Messiah will come setting his foot on the Mount of Olives, Mount of Ascension. And that's why the gospel starts when Jesus is dead and is risen. Where does he ascend? On the Mount of Olives. So it's clear that he's saying to everybody, I'm the Messiah. Where does he, what was I going to say? When he dies and is risen, Matthew says, the tomb's open, the curtain of the temple tears. For a Jew that reads that, it's totally the prophecy of the Holy of Holies getting out, the presence of God, the Shekhinah, getting out of the Holy of Holies and spreading everywhere. Everything becomes holy. Yes, because Jesus, as the Messiah, as God made flesh, conquered not only the sin, not only the slavery of the people that were in Egypt, got to be free, but conquered sin and conquered the last enemy, which was death. So the presence is everywhere. So now God is everywhere. And so a Jew that reads those sentences recognizes why the curtain of the Holy of Holies is teared, why the gospel says that. But if you don't know the Jewish roots of the gospel, you cannot get that, but they get it if they get to read it. So it's beautiful to have today the Mass that tells us that the real children of God are the ones, not necessarily the mother that gave birth, but the brothers and sisters and his mother are the ones who follow the word. Because he gave all of himself in the word, and it unfolded in the end into the word being so much in love of us that the word makes himself human and joins us and now feeds us the permanent manna. So it's totally the unfolding of the history of the church that brought to the discovery of the Eucharist gradually being adored So the moment of elevation being suspended a little longer so we can contemplate the Word made food is totally scripture. It's logic with the scripture.